start to develop that relationship. And from that place of being able to connect to positive sensation in a way that's not sexualized can help us to grow our relationship to our sexuality, because we get to first deconstruct those connotations to then reconstruct in a way that feels true and authentic to us. So I really don't believe that anyone who says like, oh, I'm just not a sexual person, like I've been told that by partners, is like, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have to figure out what feels good to you. And that's different for each person. And we can't find what feels good until we can connect to sensation. And that usually happens with good blood flow and presence and time and patience and introspection. And all of those things are part of this journey.
Welcome to the Mystics Rising podcast. I'm Jen Riley, and I'd love to welcome you to our show today with Sydney Zwicker. She is a women's health coach, a pelvic floor specialist, and an all-around total badass when it comes to healing the womb, healing through the womb. And I just love that there is this somatic practice that is really connecting women into this like deeper area of their pelvic bowl that has so much rich context for just building more awareness, actual like muscle, like energy release in that area. And there's a lot of wisdom and trauma that gets stored in our womb. And so on the episode today, we go through many of the different modalities, the ways that we can connect. Sydney shares a beautiful meditation practice for connecting to the womb. So stick around and enjoy. And there are some links in the show notes and a discount to her online pelvic floor class. So enjoy. Well, welcome, Sydney. I'm very excited to have you on the show today and to explore the world of the divine feminine, of womanhood, of our sacred root, and ways of like deeper connecting to this place. I know this might be a woman-centric podcast, and I want to welcome all the men who are in support of women. And getting to know the depth of and breadth of womanhood and our connection. So I'm welcoming you, Sydney, and maybe you want to share a little bit about who you are and what brought you to this work.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation. My name is Sydney Zwicker, and I'm a women's health specialist and pelvic care practitioner. I'm out in Denver. And I'm just excited to continue the conversation to shed the stigma around the female lived experience and the female body. I think there is a deep lack of education or holistic education around the female body. And without education, we can't have informed choice. And so much about empowering women on their journey is about listening to their stories and understanding their bodies so that they can feel more empowered as they walk through the world. And I feel like that is deeply my mission and my passion in life, is to help women along that path.
Yeah. What is that path, Sydney?
Yeah. It's different for each woman. I am, as I said, I'm a holistic pelvic care practitioner, which is a really powerful type of body work created by a woman named Tammy Kent, who's out in Portland, who's a pelvic floor PT. And what she found in her 30 plus career now is that you can't separate the story from the woman coming into your door. And that idea that working physically with the body, we also have to allow space for the emotional and the energetic, and how women came to have that pain point, and to really integrate the two to create a whole body healing experience for women. So whether it's postpartum care from sexual trauma, embodying the spirit of the female body or your womanhood or your connection to sexuality, all of these different ways that female bodied humans are trying to reconnect, allowing more grace there to acknowledge that they have a female lived experience, which is different than a male bodied lived experience. So many elements of our culture, whether it's in the exercise culture or diet culture or any part of the wellness culture, a lot of those ideologies were adapted for the male body, which is different. It doesn't cycle like the female body. That's why pharmaceutical tests happen on male rats, no matter what the drug is, because female rats are erratic, as they say. And understanding the female lived experience, which includes a cyclical nature, really helps us to find more compassion and empathy for our day-to-day living.
I love that. I mean, I think so much of what we talk about on the show is how trauma, it shows up and shapes our life. And I feel called to share like there's like big T trauma and little T trauma. And trauma is really anytime we have an experience that we can't be fully with, and it gets compartmentalized like in our being. And that can be both in our consciousness, right? And I know through a lot of the work that I've done, it gets stored in the body. And the women, just to be a woman, there are even greater contexts. I find that we are really shifting, because there's been so much with the like unhealthy masculine, unhealthy feminine through the patriarchal system. And I'm finding that there's both like the traumas that I'm holding within my womb. And as I do this work, there's actually the greater cultural context of things that we're shifting, that are getting, and a lot of it is getting stored into our pelvic bowl, our pelvic floor. And so I'm curious, what are you seeing as women are opening this area up and getting more familiar with it? What is it like to come into this space? And what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just as a foundational point around the pelvis and the pelvic diaphragm or pelvic floor tissues are foundational in our fight or flight response. They're a huge part of our nervous system. Similar to when you get stressed or angry, you can feel yourself clenching your jaw. The pelvic tissues do the same thing. They clench up and in for it to talk about fight or flight as like that metaphor of running away from a lion or fighting the lion. Its job is to, with the pelvic tissues, is to provide stability. So you can run faster, or you can really like anchor down and fight the lion. And so every person, whether you have a male body or female body, uses and engages the pelvis when they have a stress response, whether that stress is a physical response or it's an emotional stress response. It's such a big part, a foundational part of how we interact in our modern world, which is quite a stressful place. Especially these last few years, I feel like we're waking up to how chronically stressed we are. And so for any person tapping into their body and tapping into their pelvis and how to unwind from the pelvis, from the root, is helping to re-engage with stability in their life, whatever that looks like. And so often when people are coming to do this work, they're looking for ways to stay embodied, to come back to softness here so that they can more easily navigate life. It's not about not having stress in your life, but being able to navigate that stress. One of my favorite teachers, Kimberly Ann Johnson, recently did like an Instagram live and talked about like kind of like that being in the ocean with the waves, if that is what we're talking about stress. So if you're floating in the ocean, the waves are never going to stop coming. That is stress. And what we're looking for is not a regulated, perfectly regulated nervous system. That never actually happens. It's it's constant movement of sometimes you float over the wave, sometimes you dive into the wave, and sometimes the wave like smashes on your face and you drink a lot of ocean water. The idea is that that's going to happen from time to time, but how can you recover after your head floats back above, you're choking and coughing, and how can you start to regulate to a place where you can float over the wave or decide to dive under the wave, depending on what feels best for you. And that is what that resilience to stress is like. And the pelvis is a foundational part of that journey and finding more ease in regulating your process and movement throughout the world.
Yeah. And I think it's been, I want to say, like, not a modality that a lot of women have really realized as a resource of tapping into that stability in stressful times or in big waves.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, most people don't know this work exists. Even like in like the more traditional medical sense of like pelvic floor PT, we think of really only as last case scenario or postpartum care when real big shit has happened. But we don't think of it as an everyday practice. I think people are more subscribing to whether it's yoga or meditation and all these other mind body techniques, but we really leave out the pelvis. And the main reason for that is the stigma, the context of the world we live in, patriarchy. The pelvis for most people is something that is dirty or dangerous. Especially young girls growing up, it's like, don't let anyone see, don't let anyone touch this. And then whether you turn 18 or you become a sexually active person, all of a sudden you're supposed to be deeply embodied in this almost like, oh my goddess energy and be a fully sexualized being when you've spent your whole life disconnected from here. Disconnection from really holistic and understanding sexual anatomy, learning about your menstrual cycle in a way that's not just like, if you look at a penis, you'll get pregnant or an STD. Really finding ways to educate and empower female bodies along the whole journey so that we can connect to these parts of ourselves. The pelvis is so taboo. Anything down there, we don't even talk about anatomical names or the ways that we talk about our pelvis. All of that language has a resonance that continues to create this culture that this place is dangerous. And of course, if it's dangerous, you're not going to want to be embodied there. You're not going to want to work here. So a lot of this can feel really jarring and new to women. And I think it's really powerful right now that there is a sort of revelation that's happening around womb work that has its pros and its cons. There's a lot of really not great stuff out there of people talking like they know and they've done the education when they've taken like one workshop that opened their spirit to it. And so finding that way of getting this information to people and also grounding it. So often like the womb space is talked about as like being part of your sexuality, but we're not talked about how it's part of your intuition. We talk about that in the psychic and the third eye. And how can we make this work tangible? And then from there, grow whatever that spirituality or sexuality looks like. That for me is really the way that I approach womb work or pelvic work, is that if we can root down into anatomy, physiology, really deep understanding of like how and why this works, that's when we can then expansively connect to growing our relationship to sexuality or spirituality, because we have a foundation of safety first versus trying to feel really sexual and really embodied when we don't know what's going on down there. We don't have a relationship. And so, yeah, it's like, it's a whole game changer for most people when we start to approach the pelvis.
I love this, what you're talking about too, with, young women, even girls, like how do you recommend kind of cultivating this healthy relationship from an earlier stage, or how do you see the world maybe being different?
Yeah, good question. I hope to be part of that revolution. I mean, I think a big part is like having conversations. I feel like what I'm working with right now is a lot of like talking to mothers and older, younger women and like starting to feel comfortable in having the conversation with themselves so that they can model like having these conversations around, whether it's around genitalia, what they look like, what sensation feels like down there, what bleeding looks like and feels like, and like what is normal, and like making it something that is beautiful to feel empowered by, not something that is disgusting that you have to hide. But it's all about these conversations. And the ones that, the reason why we don't have them is usually because as parents, our parents felt uncomfortable with them so they wouldn't have them. And the work right now for adults is to get comfortable being uncomfortable and start having these conversations with our younger generations, both girls and boys, so that there can be safety here in exploring and curiosity versus shame. Moving away from the shame story of, I know around my sexuality growing up, like it did feel shameful, like to not know what things were, whether it was like learning about how to interact with partners at a young age or how to put on a condom, like all these things of, because there was a shame story, I ended up being so disempowered along that journey and then had to like backtrack and heal that dysregulation versus feeling educated and empowered to ask the dumb questions or quote unquote dumb questions so that I could feel more spaciousness there. And that I think for me is what the service we do to our young people is not allowing for education to ask the awkward questions so that we can feel when it comes time to make choices around sexuality or what kind of birth control we want to use or how we want to interact with this part of our body, that we don't feel safe to do that. And so that I think is really where this change has to start, is start having the awkward conversations with yourself, educating yourself so that you can share that with the younger generations and so that they can feel empowered and being curious as they discover these parts of themselves.
I think what keeps coming up in me as you share this is the sacredness of and the power and like the depth of power that is associated with our whole genitalia and womb. I think that whole awakening didn't happen for me until I was like in my mid 30s, and to have that understand, the depth that I had at those earlier ages, it was really shallow, right? It's like, oh, like this, there's sex, there's this menstruating that happens during the month, and it's like, okay. And that's as far as it went. And I had no idea that it actually was connected to my intuition and that there was a voice from there. And there was like the power of my creativity was coming from there and being able to connect into that energy. I think about had I had that understanding and embodiment at a younger age, there's so much more of a deeper respect for myself, like in a respect for myself in like a sexual situation that I certainly didn't have at that age, that I feel could be like so important and into why we create boundaries. I know a lot of women that I've had these conversations with talk about how when they really connect to their womb space, there is like this ferocity of boundaries and in rooting into their boundaries and protecting themselves that comes online. And I've certainly noticed that in my own work. I think, God, what would have my life had looked like had I had always carried this sacredness with me?
Totally. And I think in terms of embodying the nervous system, the pelvis is really the foundation of that for me, at least. And I am biased with my point of view. But like that idea of when I talk to women and they come to me for all different reasons, sometimes it's a physical pain point like incontinence or pain during intercourse, something physically painful in the body. Often it's more of an emotional pain point of low libido, disconnection from my body or my sexuality. And then sometimes it's just like, I want to embody more the feminine and like connect more with my female organs and all of those things. But what I find in terms of like that sort of tapping in point and what I like, occasionally people are like, what can you promise me? And I don't really make promises. I think someone who does that probably is not great in integrity because they don't leave space for miracles and for really your lived experience. But one of the things that I say that like, my main intention for outside of like any like specific things for you is that allowing you to connect to your fuck yes and your hell no, and that like deep body voice, which talks in those extremes and that we often ignore. And it's a different voice inside of us than our thinking voice. It's a different voice than the shoulds and I can'ts, or the thing that compartmentalized the nervous system that's like, I shouldn't be here right now, is different than like, get the fuck out of here right now, which comes from a different part of our body. And for me, it really comes from that gut, the pelvis, and the pelvic bowl is more than just your female reproductive organs. It's the hips. It's so much part of the bottom of your axial spine. It is so deeply important into your nervous system abilities and capacities, and that function of keeping you safe and keeping you expansive in the same place, because we can't become expansive until we have safety. And so that root is so foundational. I keep saying that word. It's like foundational to thriving as humans. And that's really what my intention when I work with women is, to allow them the ability to tap into that innate wisdom, because I don't have access to that of their body. It's really them who, it's each person individual that knows what their fuck yes and their hell no is. And it will change per person. It's not, there's no cookie cutter here. Our nervous system and our safety, our level of what feels safe to us, comes from our lived experience. And really allowing for that full person to thrive in their full truth is so important.
I love that, to thrive in their full truth. What a beautiful world that would be if we could all tap into thriving in our truth.
Yeah.
For women who are not familiar with this work, or mothers that are now thinking, oh, how can I better role model and embody this for my child? What are some ways that people start getting into this, or what are some ways to start getting familiar and connecting?
Yeah, I'd say that most people get into this work usually via one of their pain points. So a lot of women start to get into womb work because of their relationship with menstruation. And I say that this can sometimes be an easy access point because there's a lot of really great information now out there around what is the menstrual cycle. It's not just, we think of that as just like the days of my period, but it's the whole cycle of your body, of understanding the importance of ovulation for full body health, understanding birth control, and as female bodies, we're the ones taking the hormones, but we're only fertile like 12 to 24 hours. Women start to discover this information often on the other side of the birth control story, when they're off birth control and start their fertility journey and struggle. That's a lot of women who come to me is, I was told to take birth control because of my acne at 14, and that it would just be easier until I wanted to have a baby. And it's been 16, 20 years. And now I'm off birth control and I'm trying to get pregnant and we're struggling.
That whole narrative is so outrageous to me and disrupting the whole hormonal cycle that we're meant to go through. And I've known so many women that have shared like pain points of depression and, disconnection to themselves during, taking those hormones. And I feel like that's a narrative that a lot of women have been really blinded to what's actually happening when you're taking birth control.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, first of all, I think whatever your birth control method is, I really subscribe that every woman has a decision to choose what works for her and her body, but that our doctors and our educators need to allow us informed consent, which can't happen if you don't know what's happening when you take the pill or any sort of hormonal birth control. And what's happening is basically you're in your endocrine system, so your hormone system, it cuts off the brain that kind of is like the mastermind of like what needs to happen from the reproductive system. And so if you think of like there's no electricity or no messages going from, it's the Soviet war. Like there's nothing going in and out of Russia kind of thing. Like it's nothing happening from the brain and the reproductive organs. And so the body stops thinking about like having messages there, like sending things there. And then when you come off birth control, we expect those messages to like start right back up, but there's no connection there. It doesn't have the history of that. And so it takes time to rewire those connections to allow to reboot the system. And sometimes the system doesn't ever fully reboot. And that is one of the consequences of hormonal birth control or hormonal anything, is we're affecting our brain chemistry and our body's natural ways of connecting to what feels right in homeostasis. Like this is all part of not just reproductive health, but full body health. As I said, ovulation is really important for our thyroid, which is our immune health. And so when you take birth control for long periods of time, there's more of a chance of developing a thyroid disorder because your thyroid doesn't get what it needs to have its feedback for its hormones. It's why a lot of women deal with thyroid issues. That being said, getting pregnant is also really, really challenging. The fact that like we are the ones who have to deal with the consequences of a pregnancy, whether you decide to keep the baby or have an abortion or anything else that happens. That also is a big hormonal influx of your body of dealing with that. And so for me, the big part of educating around the female hormonal system, that there are non-hormonal, non-intrusive ways of understanding your cycle to understand your health. What's great about being in a female body and cycling is that once a month you get like a full download of data of how does my body feel like we're navigating through the world, whether it's through stress, what's going on hormonally. And that is your period, like whether you're having symptoms of cramps, the color of your blood, the day it comes, like all of those things really give us information about how we're navigating the world. And for me, that is like so potent to know I can understand the science of my body. Like if you ever fear like bleeding into your underwear, like if you do certain types of like FAM, so fertility awareness methods, like you'll know the day you'll have your period because your temperature drops and you'll be like, oh, cool, like I put on my period panties, or I'll put in a cup today, and you'll have that before the blood even shows up outside of your body. And all those different things for me is like, as someone who loves the body, is fascinating. And to impassion our young women or women at any age to be in touch with that is so helpful in recognizing earlier as preventative care to understand when something's a little funky in the body, besides when something becomes a really big issue.
It kind of speaks a little bit to what you're saying in this. So when you're talking about the mice and doing the research and using male mice versus the female because they're erratic. And yeah, the males, I know the male system, cycles with the sun, right? It's a 24-hour cycle where we're cycling kind of with the moon and have a longer 28-day-ish cycle.
Yeah.
And so like the same like hormonal cycle that a male will go through in 24 hours, we go through that in the 28 days. And I do find part of my practice has been to educate myself more and be more aware of my different stages of the cycle, and to like live more into these different areas of like having that extra energy when I'm ovulating versus kind of like coming into my luteal phase and being more like connected to more task oriented work, and kind of and trying to hold some of my more creative projects in alignment with these like waves, and to just allow myself to move at this seemingly like slower pace. I'm curious, what your experience is of maybe living cyclically.
Yeah. The biggest thing I think it allows for any person is more compassion and empathy for yourself. Um, like the shame story that we all have to like deal with in our society is in capitalism is this productivity. And I think there's a lot of like boss babe energy around like, I am just fully productive all the time. And it's just not how the body works. Your body's not there to support you to be fully 100% all the time. Our cycle is there to really help us energetically, and our brain chemistry changes throughout our cycle. And so finding like knowing where you are in your cycle, why maybe you need more sleep or food needs change. If you are not on hormonal birth control, if you are cycling, and if you are ovulating, your body temperature changes post ovulation. It can rise up to a full temperature degree. What that does basically is makes an incubator in case there's an egg that needs to be implanted. And that's like the physiological why your body does it. But what happens is like we need more food to do the same amount of stuff. If you're eating the same meals, you're not going to feel as energized. The types of food we need are different. So more of those good fats, proteins, leafy greens to help process through the estrogen. If all of this is going over your head, just know that like the second half of your cycle, it's harder to regulate your blood sugar. So you're more likely to be grumpy if you're not doing things to eat foods that help stabilize blood sugar. I'd say like the simplest version. I always try to come back to the idea that I'm deeply in this world. And for people who are just stepping in, all this information can feel overwhelming, and know that it doesn't need to be. It changes how you're able to navigate life. Like if you went out with your girlfriends and had like 5 Cosmos, following day, you're not going to have the same energy you would have as if you went to bed at 10 o'clock after eating a really nice meal. The same thing is happening internally in our world of ovulation is a big event. Your body prepares for it. It does all these things. And post ovulation, it just needs like, we need rest. We need to like recover from all of that energy that we've put into ovulating, and to create space for like, we might be pregnant. Like, even if you're not planning to be pregnant, like your body doesn't know that. It still wants that. That's part of our animal body, that, and our hormones that are there to like, this is part of being in a female body. And so allowing yourself to navigate through this gives you so much more empathy to know that like, yeah, last week I could do, I could go to like four meetings and like not even eat lunch and like feel like $100. And then the following week is like, I had one Zoom call and like, I now need to take a nap and like eat my body weight in burritos. Like all of that is normal when you can start to tap into, where am I in my cycle? And then, as I said before, like when we do arrive at our bleed, we have all this information, whether it's like we have a lot of cramping because there's congestion here because of dietary stuff or lack of movement throughout the cycle, because not all cycles are about a month long. Some are longer, some are less. And so it's really important just to have that information can really help when something else feels off. Having those data points to give your healthcare providers, especially if they do holistic views on healthcare, can be really powerful.
There's something too about when I actually start to bleed. I find that like a couple of days, I don't know the science behind this, but I'm just curious. Like I notice like the couple of days, like right before I feel very like ungrounded. And then as soon as I start to bleed, like it just is this deeply grounding place. And I find myself in this beautiful bliss of like stillness and like deeply listening intuition. Like there's just this like really powerful grounding. And I've loved kind of like almost waiting for that, and like kind of, going with the flow of my cycle. And that space and time, I'm just like, oh, like I feel it's like it's like a stillness, like a tired stillness, and like a deep, deep listening. I'm curious what part of that cycle is common, or is that something that you see a lot?
Yeah, I'd say that is for me the goal. And when people are learning this education, is we want to be able to be with that stillness and feel okay there versus feel overwhelmed by it or anxious in it, which is normally how we feel when culturally how we're talked about our period, is it's something to be worried about. Like you want it so you're not pregnant if you're not trying to get pregnant. Otherwise than that, it's a nuisance, right? Instead of this really deep, wonderful internal time. When we start to like track the 4 phases of our cycle, we often like have a relationship with them as with the seasons. So we call our period or our bleed time as inner winter. That idea that winter, you're like, yeah, things get slow, things get still. It's that kind of inner darkness that a seed needs to germinate, that cold it needs to like know that like we're in winter, we're in this period of incubation of like what's happening and integration. And it's a powerful stillness for the modern world and the modern body, right? If we're constantly like giving out our energy and producing, like at some point we're going to hit burnout. And in being able to embody or create space for your bleed time is a really powerful tool in battling burnout in our culture. I had a teacher who once said, like, if you could just plan like 2 to 4 days vacation once a month, that would be ideal. But most of us can't do that. But even just having that acknowledgement of like making sure you're wearing looser clothing, finding a moment to honor your bleed time, even just like, even if it's annoying to you, like what are some ways we can connect? For me, one of the first ways that I learned to connect to my bleed time was using my menstrual blood as like to water my plants. Can barely keep a pathos alive. It's my once a month ritual of nothing else. Like I'm glad I have my period because my plants won't die. If that blood was supposed to like nourish cells to become a baby, it's really full of like yummy things for plants. So that would be my advice. If you're looking for one way to connect to your cycle, give your period blood to your plants. As I was saying, this time is a time of stillness, is a time of softness. It's a time to like not go hang out with 30 people because we're highly sensitive. Our nervous system is in this place where it's trying to recalibrate. Kind of the whole system is resetting in terms of like hormonal stuff. It's like, okay, where's our estrogen levels? Where's our progesterone levels, which are 2 of the main hormones in the female reproductive system? it's trying to recalibrate so it can restart the cycle, because bleeding means that we are not pregnant. And so our body's like, okay, we're bleeding, we're clearing, and so we can restart again. And that is the part of the cyclical nature of like, if there is no end point, but there is a stillness point, there's a softening that can be, and like noticing what you feel there can be really helpful in helping you navigate your life. Each point of our cycle, whether it is in the bleeding, in the what's called the follicular phase, so our springtime leading up to ovulation, or ovulation could be a powerful time feeling like you own the world, you're $1,000,000. It can also be overwhelming and feel like high anxiety and manic energy, depending on your relationship to feeling that much charge in your body. And then the luteal phase, that sort of post ovulation before our bleed, is, we call it PMS, or like inner bitch season, but like it's really about knowing that like integration is a big part of the human experience for me. It's like that's where the tenderness comes of understanding that at that period of your time, you have to be more careful where you give your energy. Hormonally and like biologically, what the body's also doing is, so if we ovulated and our body assumes that all ovulation could lead to a pregnancy, your libido is going to drop. Your desire to do social activity is going to drop, because that process of implantation is really fragile. It wants to keep you and the potential of a baby safe. So it's not going to want to invite in sexual activity, because that is the microbes and biome that like it doesn't want. Those are foreign things. Same with like going out into public spaces and like interacting with lots of people. That social energy you might have other points in your cycle is going to diminish. And like that is not like a spiritual thing. That is a biology thing, that our body's there to protect us in that space, because our immune system is going to be a little bit lowered in that period of time, because it has to lower for implantation to happen. Like that is part of how like the whole pregnancy reproductive cycle is. And just knowing some of those facts or factoids and can be really powerful in finding more compassion for yourself and the ways that you walk in the world.
Mm. Yeah, like the deeper understanding you have for what's happening biologically in your system, like, yeah, there's just deeper understanding for you are just where you are, and you don't need to push through and be different than where you are.
Yeah, I think that is like the story of humanity right now, right? We're living in pretty charged times. It's a wild world out there. And how do we find more connection to other humans and community and what we're all thriving for in this loneliness of the digital age? Like all of that is like, how do we also connect to our humanness is not just psychological, it's also physical. And I find that the physicality of your body and like how the body works can be a really stabilizing point for many people to like understand and find that self-compassion. And from a place where we can find compassion from ourselves, we find it for others, like truly find it for others. And I think that is so important, is like understanding that we're all human. We're all just trying to figure it out. And similar to the body, like the body's just trying to figure it out, and giving ourselves space for this helps to really allow, more of that love between other humans and for ourselves.
Hmm. I love that so much. I'm thinking a little bit around this deeper connection too to one of the exercises I know that you promote is talking to your womb.
Yeah.
And maybe you just want to share a little bit about, like, yeah, what are practices that you maybe recommend, or how do you help women kind of really listen? Because there's like the understanding the biological aspects of where my body's at, maybe in my cycle. And then there's also, I think, a deeper connection that we can make.
Yeah. It's really like any sort of meditation practice or breathwork practice of how do we connect into like what really feels true to me. It's called like interoception. So like what is going on in my inner world. And the womb space is a really powerful way to do this. Often because I personally think that most wombs are pretty sassy. And most of them have felt betrayed at some point or another, because we live in the culture we live in, or we ignore them in the ways that we ignore them. And so developing a relationship here, like I said, is really helpful in developing a relationship to what your body mind is saying. I really believe that there is a body mind and there's a thinking mind. Not say one is better than the other, though in our culture we really idolize the thinking mind, that cerebral qualities of the human, our humanness. What would it feel like instead to be able to have both of them in a room? And even if they don't agree, allow them to agree to disagree and be able to have conversations together. Part of the exercises that many women do, whether it's in session work with me or through some of my online offerings, is like this slowing down to tap into like, what does your body actually have to say? There's a language there that allows us to tap into that inner knowledge, to that fuck yes and hell no. And sometimes it's just like placing the hands in the belly and taking 3 breaths. I really don't think there's a fancy way to do this. One of my favorite techniques is just the question, like, whatever part of your body you want to talk to, whether it's your heart space, your belly space, is like asking the question, how are you today? And really noticing what comes through. Like, how are you today? Taking a breath with that and allowing whatever comes through. Like, it can be really weird. It can be something really funky. It could be numbness and like, oh, like you just don't want to talk. Like, all of those things are, it's not about the answer. It's about taking the moment. If you think of like speaking to a small child, like you could tell them, no, you can't have the ice cream. But what if you like get down on their level and say like, no, you can't have the ice cream because, or tell me why you want the ice cream. Like, is it because like it tastes good? Is it because you're sad and upset? Like, there's so many different layers to like when we take time and really give presence to another being or another living entity, the whole world opens up. Like, have you ever received that kind of presence from someone, whether you go to therapy or as a parent or parenting, or like even just from a partner, like someone is like, how are you today? And they're really listening to what you have to say. They're not giving you opinions or advice. They're just actively listening to like what feels true to you. And our organ systems can do that too. And the way they try to speak to us is through symptoms, right? There's pain here. Like, that is one of their like focal points. If we place our hands, as we place your hands with me now, if you're listening, on your low belly, and your thumbs can come near your belly button. They can kind of create a V shape with your pointer fingers down towards your pubic bone or anywhere on your low belly. And so our hands are covering both ovaries, the uterus, the bladder. We can take a few breaths and you can notice both hands on the body, the left side and the right side. Asking maybe your right ovary first, how are you today? Notice if anything comes through. Taking a few breaths. And then switching that attention to the left side. Maybe using the intention of connecting to our left ovary. How are you today? And notice if there's a difference. And that each part of our body can have this similar desire to be heard. You know, maybe they're trying to tell you through a cramping that like you're a little constipated and there's some fascial adhesions. Maybe they're trying to say like, you know, I'm really burnt out. Like, I feel connection to like the adrenals. Like, there's like, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. Like, I can't keep doing this. All of those ways that we really start to hear that inner voice when we give space to listen. And that's really what body talking for me is, or connecting to those inner voices, is we can heal a lot. We can integrate a lot about our lived experience when we give the body time to speak to us and we start to listen in its language.
I love this practice so much. I just feel like it's such a rich way to bringing our awareness in and kind of listening to the somatic expression of the different parts of our body, regardless of what part. And especially for women, I just feel like this is a really powerful practice. And there's this whole goddess thing of like, oh, you have yoni eggs and do your Kegels. And what are other ways that you're asking or working with women to, because I'm sure all these ways have benefits, but I just love so much your intuitive and soft and curious approach to connecting. You know, it's not just like, oh, just do 50 Kegels a day and you'll be all set in your goddess energy. You know, there's just like a really deep grounding in how you're connecting.
Thank you for seeing that. Yeah, I think that is like the theme of all the ways I invite women to come into their body, is really acknowledging what feels true to them. And that being said, I have many, many hats depending on the type of woman who comes towards me and what resonates most with them. I think that anytime you're exploring something on your healing path, is notice what resonates and start there. As I said, I have an in-person bodywork practice where I offer things like women's health massage. So using a lens of the nervous system, of a female nervous system, through massage, bodywork, and touch. Holistic pelvic care, or I have a couple of different programs, kind of all called the sovereign pelvis, to allow women that sovereignty connection to pelvic work. There's also, I do really love yoni eggs and wands as a tool. If that feels really empowering, if you love crystals or like want something that feels really spiritual, it is a really amazing practice. And it's used intravaginally. So we place it intravaginally, similar to kind of how you'd place a tampon. And what it's doing most, like basic level physiology, is it's through compression, massaging the pelvic floor tissues. And what that does for our body is increases blood flow and moves pelvic congestion, so fascia. And all of those things can help address different pain points that happen in the pelvis. So if there's more blood flow, that addresses hormones. Hormones travel in your blood. It helps with cellular waste. So like congestion that happens is with better circulation, your cells are more vital and more vibrant. And all of that is the different ways that it can address pain during intercourse. A lot of women come to this as like a self-care practice for dealing with painful menstruation. It can be a spiritual practice in the idea that like you're not using like silicone, you're using like a semi-precious stone. And that can feel really powerful if you're connected to the energies of like crystals. Like I used to say when I taught this workshop and when I came to this work, and how like the first time I heard of a yoni egg, it was like, oh, I never thought of putting a crystal in my vagina. But I'd put like tampons. At that point, I knew like the bleaches and stuff that are in tampons. I the joke, like I've definitely put a penis or two that I shouldn't have put in there. Like why not a crystal? It's kind of the way that I approached it when I found out about this offering almost a decade ago. You know, really using intentional thought around this of like no tool, no practice is going to be a fix all. It's really about how much you give to it and like noticing what it does for your body. And, you know, yoni eggs, like womb work, is a fad right now. So making sure it's right now and probably for forever will be this very fad kind of in like the diet world, and finding holistic education that really offers that, I think is really important, is like my little side note soapbox of not all crystals are created equal. Not all things should be used internally, and knowing that connection to what feels true in your body and how to work with it is so important. And this is one tool to work with the internal tissues. And you can do a lot of womb healing without ever working internally, but there's a whole plethora, whole tissues here that never get addressed. Similar to like when you have neck and back pain, you might go to a massage therapist who will rub your whole rotator cuff and your shoulders. Like you're doing the same thing for the pelvis, and its job is equally as important as like this foundation of like keeping stability in your body and space here. And, you know, in the pelvic bowl. So the pelvic bowl is considered, you know, the bones and all the tissues that create the whole pelvis. If you look at it, it kind of creates this bone or this bowl. And inside of there are your reproductive organs. Your whole gut sits inside of here. And then there's all these muscles and tissues that attach this space. And it's very easily can get congested like any other part of our body. You know, having difficulty with like a bowel movement, whether it's loose stool or constipation, like those things will create little adhesions in our fascia or that connective tissue that creates stability there. And moving that through massage, either internal or external, can be really powerful in creating more ease and flow in so many elements of your life. And that's just like the physical part of it. And the spiritual part is like, it's really powerful to connect to something greater than yourself. And it's really easy to do that when you use precious stones or connecting to your body and spirituality. The nervous system, as I said, you know, if you're working internally, you get to work really close to the spine. The tailbone curves into the bottom of the pelvis. You know, that's where the trippy shit can happen. Is working with our nerves. Like that is, our nerves are what make us who we are. Like we are just a bag of flesh with electricity running through it. And if you think about connecting to your nerves, like for me, the nervous system is really our connection to spirituality. You know, we talk about cervical orgasms as releasing DMT, which is the same drug that psychedelics release. And like all of this is brain chemistry. And how can we allow for the groundedness of understanding our body and our physicality? And from that place, then build upon the spirituality that comes from connecting to it, and that those qualities of our inner electricity, so our inner energy. I consider energy work nervous system work. We're connecting to the electricity, the bioelectricity of our body in different ways, and it shows up for different people. And how cool is that?
Wow. I love that. I didn't ever really thought of it so in those words, of the nervous system really being who we are in so many ways. And yeah, there's so much. And I just love just bringing it into the light, right? I mean, that's the if there's cultural shame and taboo around it, or even it's just like, in some cases, I don't even know if it's like taboo or shame. It's almost just like disassociation, right? It's just like not deemed something, I want to say, like not important. And I love bringing up this metaphor of, or just the comparison of like the shoulder cuff, right? Or our neck, and like we take care of all these other parts of our body. And yet this other part that is so connected and such a foundational piece of us is like nowhere to be seen in many people's practice.
Yeah, and I'll just share one more thing about that too, which is a foundation of a lot of the ways that I work with women around sexuality. I think, embodying your sexuality is this really expansive and yet very shameful conversation that happens often when you start in this work, that to be woman is to be super sexual. But I think a big part of the reclamation of this part of your body is not sexual. It's about, for me, sexuality is something that's individual to each person, and there's no wrong or right way to be in relationship with your sexuality. But to grow your relationship to it comes from a place of like being in touch with physical sensation. So how can we, that embodiment, right? If I can physically feel my vulva, I can then physically follow what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and therefore create my sexuality around my vulva energy or my internal energy, the cervix energy, my orgasm. All of that grows from a place of actually being able to feel. And most of us are pretty numb in this part of our body. When I work with women in session work, I work non-sexually. So with non-sexual touch, we don't do orgasmic touch, which is this idea that like we're allowed to feel positive sensation. Like, if you're at your desk and like someone comes up behind you and just like squeezes your shoulders and you're like, oh my God, that feels so good, because you've been like staring at your screen and your shoulders are in your ears. Like, also, what does it feel like to notice what that feels like in the pelvis, this area that is so deeply sexualized? Can we start to, instead of following orgasmic or pleasurable touch, if pleasure is a word that is triggering for you, as it is for many people, what does positive sensation feel like in the body, anywhere in the body, but specifically in the pelvis? And can we connect to that positive sensation? That's our fuck yes, right? Versus the challenging sensation, the hell no of our body, and start to develop that relationship. And from that place of being able to connect to positive sensation in a way that's not sexualized can help us to grow our relationship to our sexuality, because we get to first deconstruct those connotations to then reconstruct in a way that feels true and authentic to us. So I really don't believe that anyone who says like, oh, I'm just not a sexual person, like I've been told that by partners, is like, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have to figure out what feels good to you. And that's different for each person. And we can't find what feels good until we can connect to sensation. And that usually happens with good blood flow and presence and time and patience and interoception. And all of those things are part of this journey. I know you've asked for techniques. And so I'll share one of my favorite techniques for just like starting to breathe and feel into the pelvis. It's called pelvic cupping or vulva cupping. And so taking one hand and placing it on your vulva, and your vulva is the external part of your genitalia. So it starts kind of at what's called the mons pubis, or where your pubic hair would start, and goes all the way down. It's that external part. And so you just take one hand and make kind of a little cup shape with it. So kind of curving the fingers in and placing it and just holding your vulva and breathing and noticing what that does to help downregulate your nervous system and to provide that touch as feedback. You can close your eyes and notice what it feels like to touch your vulva, what comes up for you. And then if it feels good, noticing how your vulva feels touching your hand in return, that dual perspective of receiving touch and giving touch. And, that for me is like one of the main if I say quote unquote homework assignments that people ask for, is how do I do this work by myself, is bringing in really safe touch and noticing if this touch feels safe or not to you. For many people, it won't feel safe in the beginning. There might be your mind starts to spin because you're touching, even if it's over closed genitalia, like it's taboo area, and breathing with that, noticing that, moving your hand in a way, in a place that feels safe enough as an edge of exploration and curiosity. All of these are ways to start to bring awareness. And from awareness, we bring all of those other fun things to find that connection.
I love that so much. It's just like more and more awareness, more and more like deep intimacy and authentic connection, like with ourselves on such a deep level. I feel like that's so important because I feel like I hear so many women being like, oh, like I can't orgasm, or, oh, I don't need to orgasm all the time. Or and to me, when I hear it in such a nonchalant way, it's like this, just like a total disassociation and like a lack of intimate relation with this part of ourselves. And it's like, I just, yeah, I feel like, what would the world look like if everyone had a beautiful budding relationship with their vulva?
Yeah. And I think we're so goal oriented, right? The goal is orgasm when we think about this part of our body. And what would it be like if the goal was not orgasm? The goal was connection. Um, some women who I have many clients and myself included, like if you're having physical intimacy with a partner and like, it's really wonderful to connect with them. And like, maybe I'm not going to orgasm. And that's feels like the days that feels totally fine. Like I'm not here for the orgasm. I'm here for the connection. And like knowing what that feels like in your body when you connect to your partner that time of like, yeah, like I don't need to have an orgasm right now. It's probably not going to happen because I had a stressful day at work, but like this physical touch and intimacy feels really nice and regulating for me. Like you're allowed to have that same sort of relationship with yourself. Like our touch of our genitalia and our pelvis does not have to be sexual. Sometimes it's more healing when it's not sexual, that therapeutic no to the sexuality, so that that embodiment and connection here can feel true and safe. And from that place of safety, we can grow so much.
And I think that's just like that is like such a universal principle that has come up so much, of having safe space or having this like safe container to be all of who you are, and to have that presence to be able to really feel all the intricacies and many multiple parts of you that are coming online in that moment, is such a deeply healing space. And then to be able to take that space, whether it's in either in groups, working with people, or even just as we were talking today, like bringing it into different parts of our body. I mean, what a healing practice, just safe spaces.
Yeah, I truly agree with that, that there are so many different ways to cultivate safety. And it's finding which ones feel best to you. So whether it's working with a practitioner who can really hold space and curate for you, or working by yourself and taking an online course, or finding tons of free material that's on there between Instagram reels. And there's so many people who like offer meditations, and noticing if that meditation resonates with you or not. Like go to everyone's, sign up for everyone's email list. They always give you a free stuff. Like I have a whole free offering if you want a free embodied anatomy, like that's on my email list. And there's so much information out there, or so many different ways, and just finding what feels true to you in that moment, and knowing it can change. I think that's the biggest part I tell clients is sometimes like doing a yoni egg course, or is like, that's like the one thing that worked for me and now I feel full. And sometimes that's just the catalyst. Often it's just the catalyst of whether seeing a practitioner to develop your self practice, similar to like we go to yoga classes in groups so that we can figure out what the moves are, and then coming home and bringing that into our life. Or sometimes it's working by yourself to feel safe enough to work with another person. Working with a practitioner is never the goal, but it is available. And knowing that it's available can feel really empowering, that when you're ready, there are people out there. There's not many of us, but there's enough of us, I hope. And hopefully there'll be more coming, especially who are doing this work with integrity, to be able to find deeper ways to connect to yourself. That if nothing else, know you are not alone in this journey, and that nothing about you is broken, or will stay broken. Everything can heal. And there are resources for every type of person who wants to start a relationship. And there's resources for those who don't yet feel ready. knowing that we are here can just be as healing as interacting with us.
I love that message so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Sydney. We'll have links in the notes for any of your courses and your website to work with you. And I know you have like an amazing Instagram account that we'll also link to as well. And I think, yeah, are there any upcoming courses or anything that you wanted to share?
Not right now. We're doing this podcast in, what is it, mid-March 2022. In the summertime, I'll have maybe one or two online offerings that I'll offer. And then a couple of I'm doing a retreat in October for women who really want to embody this all the way down in Costa Rica. But we talked about this earlier, that for anyone who is curious about the online course, I'd love to offer the Mystics community. They get 10% off the course. The coupon code will be in the notes too for everyone who wants that or is curious. And always feel free to reach out too if you're looking for local resources. I have a huge network, and I love to share if working with me one-on-one is not a good fit or not available to you. I think a big part of this work, especially with many pelvic practitioners, is like, how can we get this information into people's hands? And we love to refer to other ways to approach this if our work does not resonate with you personally.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Sydney.
Thank you, Jen.